Some people won't like what I'm about to say, but you know it's true the moment you hear it. Have you ever noticed how some women blame men for absolutely everything until the second the world stops being comfortable? The moment the lights go out, the moment something breaks, the moment danger hits, suddenly the same men they criticize become the only ones they trust to keep them alive. Here's a psychological paradox no one wants to admit. We live in a generation terrified of men, yet completely dependent on them for survival. And that contradiction exposes everything wrong with modern conditioning. Think about it. Ask someone today what scares them more. A total societal collapse. No electricity, no water, no police, no food delivery. Or being alone in a room with a man. You'd assume the apocalypse wins every time, right? But watch closely. More and more people, especially young women, say they'd rather face the end of civilization than trust the opposite sex for 10 minutes. That's not fear. That's programming. We've created a world where danger is imaginary and comfort is real. Yet people fear the imaginary more than the real. I had a client whose girlfriend would walk to her car at night with her keys between her knuckles, convinced she was seconds away from being attacked. But this same woman would drive in the rain, texting her friends at 120 kilometers per hour like nothing could ever happen. Statistically, one of those fears is absurdly unrealistic. The other is legitimately life-threatening. But the unrealistic one feels real, because she's been conditioned to fear men, not reality. The truth is harsh. Most people have never faced actual violence. What they've faced is stories, sensational headlines, trauma porn, social media fear loops, ideological conditioning that paints half the population as predators and the other half as perpetual victims. They're living in the safest era in human history, while believing they're one step away from being hunted. And here's where the contradiction becomes almost comedic. The same individuals terrified of dangerous men rely on men for every single layer of comfort around them. Who keeps the internet running? Who repairs power lines during a storm? Who builds the roads, fixes the cars, maintains the plumbing, delivers the food, enforces the law? Yet somehow, the people who keep society functioning are portrayed as its greatest threat. This psychological illusion shatters instantly the moment real crisis hits. I remember a 3-day power outage in a suburban neighborhood last winter. No lights, no heat, no hot water, no phone chargers, no security systems. You know who panicked first? You guessed it, the same woman who spent months ranting online about toxic masculinity. Within hours, she was knocking on my client's door, begging if his generator could keep her refrigerator running so her food wouldn't spoil. Because ideology evaporates when comfort disappears. Fear programming collapses the moment reality arrives. In crisis, something ancient switches back on. Instinct. And instinct knows exactly who can build, fix, lift, defend, and act under pressure. Not because women are incapable. Not because men are heroes. But because evolution wired these roles long before social media convinced people otherwise. And once you see through the illusion, through the fear that's been sold, packaged, and monetized, you begin to understand. Some women blame men for everything only because they live in a world where they still feel safe enough to complain. When that safety breaks, they don't run to ideology. They run to men. And that's only the beginning of the contradiction. But the real twist? The fear of men doesn't come from real danger, it comes from emotional comfort. It's easy to fear something when you know someone else will protect you from it. Modern society has created a strange paradox. Some women villainize masculinity while simultaneously depending on it for every hidden layer of their survival. They condemn the fortress while living inside it. They criticize the soldiers while sleeping safely behind their shields. Let me give you an example so clear it's almost brutal. During a major blackout in a coastal city last year, cell towers went down, streets went dark, and panic spread. You know who gathered first? Groups of men. Guys who barely knew each other. Neighbors, coworkers, strangers, pooling generators, tools, supplies, flashlights, planning who watches which area of the block. And you know what happened next? The exact women who had spent years preaching independence, criticizing masculinity, and posting online about not needing men suddenly appeared in those circles. Handshaking, asking if they could stay close because they didn't feel safe. Of course they didn't, because crisis rips ideology apart and reveals instinct. You can pretend all you want, but the moment the world stops functioning, the primal truth becomes unavoidable. The same men demonized in comfort are the ones relied on in danger. And the contradiction doesn't stop there. This dynamic exists everywhere, even in smaller, more ordinary situations. A woman might say, "All men are irresponsible. All men are dangerous. All men are the problem." But when her tire blows out on the highway, who does she call? A man. When her basement floods, who does she call? A man. When her car won't start at midnight, who does she call? A man. When her Wi-Fi dies and she can't work, who does she call? A man. When her neighborhood gets loud at 2 a.m. and she hears a noise outside, who does she call? A man. This isn't hypocrisy, it's programming colliding with instinct. She was taught to fear men. Her biology pushes her to rely on them. Those two forces cannot coexist peacefully. And deep inside, she knows it. That's why the anger is so loud. That's why the rhetoric is so intense. That's why the blame is so constant. Because the moment she admits men aren't the enemy, she also has to admit she's vulnerable. And modern society trains people to fear vulnerability more than danger. But here's the part nobody wants to look at. People don't fear men, they fear needing them. And as long as civilization stays stable, that fear remains theoretical, something to post about online, something to use as identity, something to wield socially. But when the power goes out, when the food stops coming, when the system collapses even a little, a different truth emerges. You don't run away from the people you blame. You run toward the people who can save you. And that's when the masks fall off. But here's where the entire narrative collapses, not in theory, not in debate, not in social media arguments, but in reality. Because the moment real danger arrives, people don't look for ideology. They look for competence. And competence has no gender, but it has patterns. I remember speaking with a man who lived through a violent riot in his city. Police were overwhelmed, fires were spreading, and people were breaking into stores and homes. He told me something chilling. When the chaos hit, every woman who spent years blaming men suddenly sprinted toward the closest man she trusted. Not because they suddenly changed their philosophy, but because their biology overpowered their programming. The same women who once said, "I don't need a man," were suddenly standing behind one, clutching his arm, asking him what to do, waiting for the calm confidence of someone who can act when fear freezes the room. And you know what he noticed? They didn't run toward the safe men. The polite ones. The soft ones. The ones they claimed to prefer. They ran toward the strong ones. The decisive ones. The ones who could face danger without falling apart. The irony? Many of those were the exact men they'd labeled as toxic months earlier. This is the truth modern society hides. You can demonize masculinity when you're safe, but you depend on it when you're not. And here's where it gets even darker. Some women don't just fear men. They need men, but only when it benefits them. In comfort, they blame men for everything. In danger, they expect men to fix everything. In peace, men are the problem. In crisis, men are the solution. But you can't have it both ways. You can't shame the protector during comfort and summon him during chaos. You can't demand safety from the same masculine traits you condemn. This contradiction creates a silent resentment nobody speaks about. Men are expected to be threats when it's convenient, and saviors when it's required. And modern culture pretends that makes sense. One man I counseled put it better than any book or theory ever could. They don't fear men. They fear that one day they'll need the very men they've been taught to hate. That's the core of the entire discussion. Because when the system breaks, even briefly, people realize something terrifying. Strength matters. Competence matters. Character matters. Courage matters. And those things do not come from fear programming, hashtags, or ideological slogans. They come from reality. The same reality our ancestors survived through. The The same reality we pretend we've evolved beyond. The same reality waiting quietly beneath the surface of our comfortable lives. Some women blame men for everything, until the moment they're staring at a world without protection, without structure, without safety nets. Then suddenly, they don't blame men. They look for one. Not because men are superior, not because women are weak, but because deep down, beneath layers of cultural conditioning, every human knows one simple truth. When life gets real, you don't run toward the narrative. You run toward the strong.